Is Yokai Watch a good game to help you learn Japanese with? That's what we're going to be finding out in today's video. Today we're going to be having a look at the first hour or so of Yokai Watch for both the Nintendo Switch and the 3DS. We're going to be checking this game out from the perspective of someone who's wanting to learn Japanese and perhaps wanting to play this game in Japanese and see if it's something that matches their level or their interests. We'll be checking out things like the difficulty level of the game, what kind of vocabulary appears in the game, what the gameplay balance is like, pros, cons, and at the very end I'll have a summary of all of my thoughts and kind of give a ranking for this game and what it's like for you to learn Japanese with. So let's get started. So one thing that's really obvious straight away is that this game does have furigana, which is the small hiragana written on top of kanji to help you read the kanji. This is very common in games that are aimed at kids, and it's incredibly good for learners of Japanese. In fact, I would almost highly recommend if you were to have your first couple of games for them to be in furigana, just to kind of get used to reading Japanese and just kind of get exposed to kanji and things like that and just get kind of used to reading Japanese. Furigana is going to change your life in the beginning, so it's really, really useful. As you can see, even for in this example sentence, we have shinboku and matsuru, relatively rare pieces of language, but you can actually read them even if you've never seen that kanji before, thanks to the furigana. So it's really, really important. But we're going to be starting a fresh file and just kind of checking out the first hour or so. Ah, that's great. Even on the explanations, like the instructions and things, there's also furigana. That makes it really accessible. Often games in the kind of instruction part don't actually have furigana, so it's very nice that this one does.
Yokai Watch!
So if you don't know, Yokai Watch is actually a very big franchise in Japan that sometimes even rivaled Pokemon, although nowadays I think Pokemon's probably won out, but Yokai Watch for a time there was actually just as popular or perhaps even more popular for kids in Japan. And the company that made these games is actually Level 5, which is the same company that made Ni no Kuni and Layton series. So a lot of the really good games that are great for beginners are made by Level 5. So for beginners, Level 5 is definitely going to become one of your favorite companies in Japanese. Okay, so as we can see, there's no voice acting. There is some kind of voices like oh and things like that, but there's not actual voice acting, at least in the gameplay. So far, the language we've seen is very everyday Japanese. It's not necessarily too difficult in like fantasy settings or anything. Like here, Besso is the name for a kind of second home, like a holiday home, and so really useful everyday language here. Another really good thing is that it is push to continue. Here we can take all of this language all at our own pace, so being able to just read the sentence, press the button, move on to the next sentence, that's really important for a beginner learner. It really is essential. So this definitely has a great combination of furigana, making it incredibly easy to read, push to continue, so you can take it at your own pace. It does have that nice little white backdrop, so I believe this would actually be pretty easy to pass if you use like a program like Capture to Text or something like that. You could actually use like an OCR reader and actually pick up the text. After a little bit of testing, one thing I've noticed is that it does have an issue with this z. It will only pick it up as su. I've tried with about 3 different sentences, and every time, whenever I highlight it to try and OCR the text, it's always toriaesu instead of toriaezu. So it's close to 90% accuracy, maybe 95, maybe. It's pretty accurate if you're going to use something like Capture to Text to try and get the actual text from an image. Although, if you used Google Lens, or for example here Google Keep, you can actually take a screenshot of the page and chuck it up there and it'll extract the text for you. It's very accurate. Google Keep is really accurate. As we can see here, it has the whole text completely perfectly captured. So just something to keep in mind, depending on the tool you use, if you're going to do OCR to kind of take the text out of an image, some are more accurate than others, while some of them are more easier to use. So far, in terms of the language that's being covered, is absolutely essential. Everything here that I've come across so far in all of the dialogue and all of the conversations is all really important Japanese for anyone to know. I haven't yet come across anything that you shouldn't know if you're not interested in a certain genre. Everything here, well, mushi-tori, bug catching, I guess it's pretty essential, right? This is something kids do. It's not, too difficult of a piece of language. So far, everything's really good. Now, I do know that the game does eventually introduce these yokai, which are like these kind of mythological creatures in Japanese, almost horror mythology, but this belief that objects have a life to them. So even ordinary items like a broom could have a life to it, or a tree could have a life to it. And yokai is a really interesting thing if you look into kind of Japanese mythology, spirituality, and culture and things like that. It's a really, really interesting subject. And this game kind of plays with that and uses these yokai. Instead of Pokemon, they have yokai instead as the Pokemon, which is really cool because it kind of brings your surroundings to life, right? Like anything could be a yokai in a way. Another really cool thing about this game is that as you walk around the kind of world map, there's lots of characters that you can talk to and kind of have these interesting pieces of dialogue. Very similar to like when you play a Pokemon game and you talk to all of the villagers or all the people right in a town. In a way, this might be even better than a Pokemon game because often Pokemon would talk about something that's not really set in real life. Like, oh, you know, that Charizard's been burning down the villagers lately, right? Not necessarily is absolutely essential piece of language for real life. Whereas here, right, this Oji-san, this old man, everything he says is very useful for any learner of Japanese. Like, because the game is set in real Japan, it's very, very useful for anyone who's wanting to learn Japanese, because it's actually one of those few games that's actually set in Japan, like for example Persona or Akiba Strip or something like that. Whereas this game is actually mostly useful language, whereas like games like Persona might go into this dark demon world, which isn't really kind of normal vocab that you really need to worry about. Yokai Watch is very beginner friendly. In fact, I would even go so far as to say it's one of the best games for learning Japanese with. I just wish it was voice acted. Unfortunately, there's not much voice acting. There is some voice acting in things like cutscenes and stuff, and some of the later ones get more and more voice acting, but particularly this first one doesn't have much voice acting. There's no logs or anything like that you can use to read everything that you've covered, although there are some kind of quest story here. So for example, you could read a summary of the story that you've progressed so far. So that's, you know, there certainly is something, and it has furigana, which is quite nice. Oh, another thing I love right here is in your mochimono, this is like your bag, you actually have like a Pokedex. But in this game, it's not just the Pokemon you catch. Everything has this kind of nice little written description about it with furigana, making it very useful. That means every single time you see something new, get a new item, catch something new, interact with something new, you may actually have something here that you can then use as reading practice. And I think that is just so useful because it's like recent things, right? We just caught a bug. Okay, so it's fresh in our memory all about bug catching. And here we have a bug net, and we can just see from the context, even if you didn't look this up in a dictionary, this thing right here is called a mushi ami. Pretty clear that this is a bug catcher or a bug net, right? Pretty obvious. And then here we have the bug that we caught, although maybe not as essential piece of language, but still interesting. We have some descriptions about it. So definitely useful language, interesting interactions. It really is a highly recommended experience. I can't really think of too many other games, especially at the beginner level, that is just going to be so fitting almost any type of learner. Even if you don't care about Yokai Watch, it's probably going to be something that you're going to find useful for you in your Japanese practice. On a very similar vein to Pokemon, I would say, although in some ways even better than Pokemon. Again, more language that's very clear to what we were just doing. We just caught all of the bugs on the tree, and again, we have that language exactly there. As you can see, the game has very friendly vibes. It's very relaxing, just friendly, nothing too threatening, often very cute and charming world. And especially if you're kind of feeling like you wish you were in Japan or you're missing Japan, coming and playing this game really can make you feel like, I'm back in Japan, in the same way that the Boku no Natsuyasumi games do as well. Like here we have the vending machines that you see everywhere around Japan. The language is never too complicated, right? Like here it's just, I hope they both do their best, and the other guy's like, I wonder which will win, and then this guy is like, I won't lose. It's just kind of very nice, digestible pieces of language. It's really not a game that's going to overwhelm you like some games will. Like for example, if you wanted to get into like Final Fantasy, that could be a little bit overwhelming. Although I love playing Final Fantasy 7 and 8 in Japanese, it can get a bit overwhelming, especially if you're a complete beginner. Whereas this game is much more approachable for a first game. I love this. I really feel like I'm in Japan, even though I am in Japan. I love temples and shrines and stuff. It always makes me feel calm and happy. Okay, so we have our first cutscene. Let's find out. Can we pause the cutscene? Yes! awesome. So there are cutscenes in this game, and as we can see, they're voice acted, and you can pause them, which is really good, just as long as you make sure not to accidentally skip it here. As you can see, the text isn't blurred out or anything like that, so you could probably even still use OCR capture software, although with subtitles it's not as accurate. It usually is better when it has a solid background behind it, but still something useful.
私の名前はウィスパー。妖怪です。ウィス。
So the first yokai that we've come across, his name is Whisper, and this is just the katakana for whisper. This is another added level of interest to the game, as a lot of these yokai actually have kind of puns for names. This one doesn't have too complicated of a name, it's not too difficult, but Whisper is just the katakana for whisper in English, and perhaps there's actually also a connection to Casper, right? Casper the ghost, and Whisper as well, perhaps, potentially. So sometimes there are these interesting puns, as kind of, similar with Pokemon as well, right? There's often these puns connecting. Although I will say that yokai can get pretty creative and fun with some of their puns, and it's a real treat to kind of discover them as you find these new yokai and kind of see the connection. It's just a really fun way to experience the language. So here, as you progress the game, your kind of quest log, your story log does actually progress. So, we haven't gone very far. I've only been playing the game for about 30 minutes, but we can see here that we already have a couple of pages that you can have for reading practice that literally summarizes what you just did. So again, more reading practice that you can get. So this game is very, very, very good for a beginner. Now, so far, after 40 minutes of gameplay, I could say that every single piece of Japanese that I've come across so far, every learner of Japanese should know. All of it is essential Japanese, so that is a very, very high ranking for a game. For this reason, I would almost put this as a baseline fundamental game for building up your Japanese. However, there are times where there is Japanese that is beyond the scope of what any beginner should learn, like for example here with this yokai. He's speaking in a very strange way. He uses this word here, sessha-tachi, and he has these ends of his sentences like mean. So here we have both a combination of more olden day samurai style language. This is actually an archaic, humble pronoun that was often used by samurai to speak for themselves. Instead of watashi or boku or ore, you would say sessha. And you can see this guy is actually kind of dressed up as a samurai, and it's actually, you can see in his name as well, Semi Maru. That's often used with like samurai names, and Semi is the name of the bug that he is. So you definitely do come across language that is above what a beginner should know, but it's quite interesting, and it's often in these kind of interesting bite-sized pieces, right? You have this samurai bug, he's speaking like a samurai. It kind of helps you connect that language and at least introduce you to that language in a nice, friendly package. And then there's things like the mean at the end, which is just the sound of a bug, right? Mean. So here he's kind of talking in a buzz type sound. So the way the game works is you just kind of befriend these yokai and they join your team. Instead of capturing them with a Pokeball, you find them instead and you have to befriend them. And there are battles, like here we're going to fight with this other yokai. And as you can see, very similar to Pokemon, you have 6 slots for 6 different yokai. As you kind of play the game, you can kind of build your own team and choose your favorite yokai to have along with you on the journey. And even here in the menu, everything here that has kanji has furigana on top, which is just fantastic. Ah, nice. And here we have the Pokedex of Yokai Watch as well. So hopefully we'll be able to actually read about the yokai that we come across. Another great thing about Yokai Watch is because it is a game that's aimed at kids, when there's a piece of language that's quite difficult that kids aren't expected to know, like for example here, Shitsuji for a steward or a butler. Well, here the kid himself, the main character, doesn't even know what it means, and so he asks, what does it mean? But you get all these funny situations like here where the character said Hitsuji instead of Shitsuji because he misheard it because he didn't know what the word was, and then the yokai here he turns into a sheep, which is the word for a Hitsuji. So Shitsuji is a butler, Hitsuji is a sheep. And so this is one great thing about this game, is there's a lot of wordplay going on. So there's going to be a whole bunch of moments as you're playing the game that keep you intellectually stimulated and keep you kind of wondering what's going on and then finding something funny. And it's a very rewarding game to play, especially for beginners. I would say it's probably in the top tier of games for beginners. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that I did say that the language in this is absolutely essential for any student of Japanese, but just because it's essential doesn't necessarily mean that it will fit your idea of what a beginner should be. Remember that this is aimed at children in Japan, so children already have a kind of understanding of the concepts of Japanese, the basic grammar, casual spoken Japanese, and they may even have a little bit of an understanding, even just a little bit of an understanding of things like keigo, which is kind of honorific polite speech. Like here, the honorific Sonkeigo word for to say, you, osharu. So this is the next level evolution of the word to say, and this is something that's very important to the culture in Japan, because the honorifics and the level in which you talk really changes a lot of your personality. And so while this is something that you might not learn until maybe the N4, N3 in Japanese, it's something that's very essential and something that even kids will understand. So you do kind of need to adjust your mindset about what a beginner game actually really means. But for me though, I would say that a good beginner game is a game that doesn't have too much language that you wouldn't need in any other situation. Like for example, I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV lately, and every second word is a word that is very specific to Final Fantasy XIV. It's something that you probably won't see in another game or another piece of media for at least maybe 6 months to a year down the road. It's that rare, maybe even ever. And so I personally would gauge a game's difficulty level on that scale as how often the language is actually important in every other piece of Japanese you'll ever see in media, manga, anime, TV, conversations, whatever. And in that way of thinking, Yokai Watch has got to be one of the very best games for learning Japanese, because so far, no joke, after an hour of playing, I would say there's only been like 2 or 3 words that I would say have not really been of that significance to the everyday learner, and 98% of the rest of the language is very useful for any learner of Japanese. As you can see here, I've taken 6 slices of my footage here from about an hour and a half of gameplay, completely random sentences, and I've just kind of broken down the average level of the language that's in these sentences. And I think it's pretty clear this game is ideal for beginners of Japanese. As you can see, at least in these sentences, 28% of the language is from the N5, 26% is from the N4, a further 12% is in the top 500. That means over 60% of the language that's in these 6 sentences is absolutely essential Japanese for anyone, and beginner Japanese. The rest of the language is still pretty useful. There's very few rare pieces of language. In fact, there is a couple of N1 pieces of language, but that language really shouldn't even be considered N1 because it's actually in the top 500 words, like ore for me. Even the previously mentioned sesha is in the top 3000 in anime, so it's still a very common word, even if it's a higher level piece of language. In fact, looking at these 6 sentences, the hardest word out of these would just be akashi, which is an N1 piece of language for proof or evidence. But it's still in the top 5000 useful words. So I think you can very safely grade this game at an N5 to N4 level. There may be some rarer pieces of language here and there, but the majority will be very essential. So obviously, as the game progresses and there's more and more yokai, that percentage will drop. But at least right now, and at least just the fundamental baseline for the game, is that it is set in Japan, it is made for kids, and it is based in kind of real life to a certain extent. So most of this language you're going to be coming across really is essential. And so for that reason, if I was actually to give this game a ranking, I would actually put this as kind of a foundation game. It's on the very baseline, fundamental Japanese that everyone should know. All of that language is in here. What that means is that if you used a game like this as your first game, you're going to have a huge step up for whenever you play the next game or read the next book or read the next manga. All of the language you're going to come across in this game is really going to help you with almost anything that you decide to play, watch, or read from here on out. And that's why I would consider this a kind of fundamental, foundational game. So this is definitely a game for beginners, without a doubt, in terms of difficulty, and I would definitely say it's on that essential level. It really doesn't have too much language that you would go, I don't need to know that. If you were to compare this for a Final Fantasy, it's way better for accessibility and difficulty and language. And this probably makes it one of the best games on the Switch for beginner learners of Japanese, as well as one of the best games, period. Like here, like this is just a normal everyday life thing, right? You have husband and wife fighting and, why don't you understand? I'm so busy with work. But they're actually being manipulated by this kind of yokai that's kind of getting them angry. But, you know, the dialogue, this is totally essential. This is all very important piece of everything here is important, essential piece of Japanese. None of this is not essential. There's furigana on all of the moves, as you can see in your move list. And in your Pokédex, you also have furigana, which automatically makes it almost better than every other Pokemon game made to date. I think the only Pokemon game that has furigana to this extent is Scarlet and Violet, and I still think Yokai Watch has even more furigana than Scarlet and Violet does. So this is actually more accessible than Scarlet and Violet, more accessible than any other Pokemon game. Even more reading practice, for example, you can actually have a look, I believe, at Yokai Spotto, and you can have these kind of hints at where some yokai might be hiding. And this is really cool because you need to first read the Japanese in order to get the hint, right? So, do you understand? So this reading practice is engaging, interesting, and it connects to the direct thing that you're doing, giving that language meaning and purpose. And that's a really important thing for when you're learning Japanese. When you learn something, for example, in like an Anki deck, it doesn't really have any meaning, value, purpose. It's just this word, and there may be a sentence attached, but do you know when you use that sentence, when you don't use that sentence? You really don't have any context. Whereas, for example, you know, coming across language in this kind of context, you can be like, oh, I see. In this situation, this is where you use, for example, accidentally, right? Like we just saw, tsui tsui waratte shimau. So tsui tsui is like accidentally, and then teshimal as well, to do something regretfully. So he's trying to hide really well, but sometimes he lets out a laugh. So this context is just incredibly useful for you. And not many games have as good of a balance as this game does, where you're kind of just a little bit of dialogue, a little bit of exploring, a little bit of looking at yokai, a little bit of laughing, a little bit of reading. It never gets too heavy, and that's something that really is amazing about this game series. Unlike Pokemon, where, you know, you may be pressing for hours and hours, especially some of the new games, and then not only that, but then you have all the Pokemon battles to do as well. It's like, it can get quite overwhelming. And so that's pretty much how the game goes, right? You walk around, you find yokai, you befriend them, you battle. And sometimes there's fun little things like here, like I just ran a red light. I didn't wait for the light to go green, and I'm being told off by Whisper here. He says, "Hey Matt, you need to follow the traffic rules. That's no good." So that's kind of fun interaction with the world. So that's a fun way of just engaging with the world in a realistic setting, right? And that's one reason why I really highly rate this game. So as you can see, Yokai Watch is a pretty interesting game to practice learning Japanese with. So what are the pros and cons? Well, you probably already have gathered that the pros are definitely that it has furigana, definitely that it's set in the kind of real world. Most of the language is essential Japanese, so most of the language that you come across you should know and you should be familiar with. It's really not that difficult. It's a very approachable game, so it's definitely the right balance of language that is essential with just a little bit of Yokai Watch language thrown in here and there. Incredibly accessible, incredibly charming and fun, and there is so much reading practice that you can have, from the dialogue to the Pokédex to the item descriptions to reading the story summary and things like that. So it is absolutely a top tier game for learning Japanese with. Absolutely. As far as cons go, there aren't too many cons, although I will say that it really does hurt me a bit that it doesn't have full voice acting. I just wish every game had full voice acting. It's just so nice to be able to hear the Japanese. It helps you with things like pitch accent, with getting comfortable with the Japanese. It's just really important to be able to hear the native Japanese speech, so I really wish it had voice acting. That's pretty much one of the only negatives, really. There isn't any voice acting, there's no logs or replayable audio, which unfortunately not many games actually have, especially not beginner-friendly games. I don't believe there are any game scripts available online, so that does make it another bit of a con, just in case you wanted to kind of read along with the game script as you play. This game I don't believe has a game script. The game does have a little tiny bit of difficult language with the yokai speech, but most of the time it is absolutely essential. Another huge pro is that you can take most of the language in the entire game at your own pace. There's very few times when the language progresses at a speed that you can't take it at your own pace and read. And there are the cutscenes, but you can press pause during the cutscenes and read it, so it's incredibly accessible. Not only that, but as I showed you, it is also usable with things like OCR readers. Because it has that solid background around the text, it does help with using things like OCR readers. And it's set in Japan, it just feels so good to be in the country, right? It's very much like a Boku no Natsu game where you're just walking around in the Japanese countryside. It's just such a nice feeling to kind of be in the country of the language you're studying. Is a really nice feel. What in the world is that? I feel like that has got to be a yokai. Let's find out. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's a yokai. So randomly, you know, coming across these interesting yokai. What is this? Like a teddy bear yokai? What's going on here? Oh, not at all. What the Nagabana? I guess Nagai banana? Maybe? I'm not sure. Oh, Hana for nose. So Nagai Hana, Nagabana, long nose, maybe. And also Bana for banana, maybe, because he does look like a banana. See, there's all this language that you can see with the puns of characters. Wow, what in the world? Anyway, closing thoughts. Yokai Watch is definitely a highly recommended game. I would definitely put it as an S tier without question. This is an S tier beginner game, and it's an S tier game in general for learning Japanese with. So I hope you guys enjoyed that video. What do you guys think? Do you think Yokai Watch is a great game or not so interesting? I think it is a little bit, you know, catered to the younger audience, but I don't think it ever gets that lame like some of those, you know, kiddie games can get. I really never felt that way playing this game. So it is, oh, what is this? I just found a random spot. Oh, they've got to be yokai. So how do you get Yokai Watch? Well, if you can manage to buy the game from the Japanese store, then it will have Japanese on it. If you buy it in English, I'm really not too sure if it's going to be able to switch or not. You can buy the game on Amazon, and I'll leave some affiliate links in the link description. If you feel like checking it out, feel free to use those affiliate links for buying this game or buying any game or buying anything at all really on Amazon. You can use those links, and a little bit of the proceeds, like 1% or something, goes to Game Gengo, which is kind of cool. But this game, as we can see here, it's not too expensive. Right now it's $27 to buy the actual physical game for the level 5 the best collection here. So you could get this from Amazon or something. There are lots of different ways of getting Japanese games, and unfortunately it's not as easy as I wish it was, but if you were wanting to check out the game, that would be an interesting way of getting it. Apparently the 3DS version does have a demo version, but with the 3DS store gone offline, I don't think it's possible to get that anymore, unfortunately. So the best way is probably going to be if you can get on the Japanese account on the Switch, or if you buy it through something like Amazon. So that's it for Yokai Watch. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. What do you guys think? Does Yokai Watch look like an interesting game to learn Japanese with, or not so much? I think it's so interesting being in kind of the Japanese setting, immersing yourself in Japan. Most of the language is essential. Most of the language is very approachable and not too difficult. I really personally, there is none of the language that I feel is uncomfortable with, or it's like, whoa, that's really, what is that doing there? The most I've seen is really just the language that some of the yokai use themselves, like sesha and stuff like that. That's pretty rare, but not too difficult. And because this game is aimed at kids, it means the language is always going to be pretty accessible. They're not going to have too much that is like way too high level, which makes it a great game to learn Japanese with. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks so much for watching. If you liked the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and come say hi on the Game Gengo Discord community, on the Game Gengo website, as well as on Patreon. And if you want to check out the Game Gengo merch, we also have a whole bunch of merch as well on the Game Gengo website. Thanks so much guys for watching. As always, I'll see you all again in the next video. See ya.